Picture a crowded cabin at 30,000 feet, where a single act of unwarranted cruelty changes multiple lives forever. A quiet, impeccably dressed black man boards a transatlantic flight holding a first-class ticket he purchased with his own hard-earned money. Instead of a warm welcome, he is met with sneers, baseless accusations, and a deeply humiliating public shaming by a senior flight attendant who firmly believes she holds all the power. She thought she was putting a stowaway in his place, entirely unaware she had just picked a fight with the airline's newest majority shareholder. Buckle up, because the karma in this story hits harder than a Boeing hitting massive turbulence. Terminal 4 at John F. Kennedy International Airport buzzed with the frantic, exhausting energy typical of a Friday evening in late November. Travelers dragged oversized suitcases over the polished terrazzo floors, their faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent glow of the departure screens. Outside, a miserable mixture of freezing rain and sleet lashed against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, delaying several outbound routes and fraying the nerves of everyone trapped inside the concourse. Arthur Sterling sat quietly in a secluded corner of the Meridian Airlines first-class lounge, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea. At 64, Arthur possessed a quiet, understated dignity. He was a man who had spent his entire life building an empire from the ground up, transitioning from a brilliant aeronautical engineer to the CEO of Sterling Aviation Holdings, a private equity firm that had, just 48 hours prior, quietly acquired a controlling 51% stake in Meridian Airlines. The ink on the contracts was barely dry. Tonight, Arthur was flying home to London on Flight 482, a Boeing 777-300ER. He wore a finely tailored but distinctly unassuming outfit, a well-worn charcoal tweed blazer, a crisp white Oxford shirt without a tie, and simple dark slacks. He looked less like a billionaire corporate titan and more like a retired university professor. This was exactly how he preferred it. Arthur despised ostentatious displays of wealth. He carried only a battered vintage leather briefcase, which currently held the confidential restructuring plans for the very airline he was about to fly. Down at Gate B32, the atmosphere was considerably less serene. Boarding had commenced late due to a catering issue, and the gate agents were rushing to process the passengers. Standing at the entrance of the aircraft, rigidly stationed at the forward galley, was Cynthia Miller. Cynthia was a senior flight attendant with 18 years of service under her belt. Her blonde hair was sprayed into an unmovable, immaculate helmet, and her uniform was pressed with military precision. Over the years, however, the magic of aviation had completely curdled within her. She had become bitter, hyper-vigilant, and deeply cynical, viewing the passengers not as guests, but as adversaries trying to pull one over on her. Worse, she harbored deeply ingrained prejudices that she frequently masked under the convenient guise of following strict security protocols. Zone 1, First Class and Diamond Medallion members, you are welcome to board at this time, the gate agent announced over the crackling PA system. Arthur finished his tea, picked up his briefcase, and made his way down the priority lane. He handed his passport and scanned his digital boarding pass on his smartphone. The machine chimed a pleasant green beep. "Have a wonderful flight, Mr. Sterling." The young gate agent smiled warmly. Arthur nodded politely and walked down the jet bridge, the heavy scent of jet fuel and damp wool mingling in the enclosed space. He stepped onto the aircraft, immediately turning left toward the exclusive first-class cabin, aiming for seat 2A. He didn't make it 2 steps. Cynthia Miller stepped directly into the center of the aisle, using her body as a physical barricade. She crossed her arms, her eyes darting up and down Arthur's unassuming tweed jacket and worn leather briefcase. Her expression hardened into a look of severe condescension. "Excuse me, sir," Cynthia said, her voice projecting louder than necessary, easily carrying over the hum of the Pratt & Whitney engines spooling up outside. "The economy cabin is down that aisle past the business section and to the rear of the aircraft." Arthur paused, offering a polite, practiced smile. "Good evening. I'm actually seated right here in 2A. He attempted to step around her, but Cynthia aggressively shifted her weight, completely blocking the narrow walkway. "Sir, I am going to need to see your boarding pass," she demanded, extending a perfectly manicured hand. The pleasantry in her voice was entirely gone, replaced by a sharp, authoritative bark reserved for scolding disobedient children. "Of course," Arthur replied calmly. He tapped his phone screen, bringing up the Apple Wallet application, and held it out for her to see. The bright screen clearly displayed Arthur Sterling. Flight 48-2 JFK LHR. C2A. First class. Cynthia barely glanced at the digital ticket. Instead, she stared directly into Arthur's eyes, her jaw set. "Screenshots are incredibly easy to fake, sir. We have been experiencing a massive issue with seat poaching on these lucrative transatlantic routes, particularly from passengers trying to upgrade themselves at the last minute." Arthur blinked, genuinely taken aback by the immediate hostility. "It is not a screenshot, madam. It is the live airline application. As you can see, the time is actively ticking on the bottom corner." "Now I am well aware of how phones work," Cynthia snapped, her voice rising another decibel. "What I'm telling you is that my physical manifest, printed just 20 minutes ago, does not have you in first class." This was, technically, a lie of omission. The physical manifest, printed 20 minutes ago, didn't have Arthur's name because his booking had been securely shielded under a VIP corporate block until the very last moment to ensure his privacy a standard protocol for high-profile executives. It had only unmasked in a digital system 10 minutes ago. "If you check your digital tablet, you will find my name has been cleared," Arthur said, keeping his tone measured and even. He had spent decades negotiating with hostile labor unions and ruthless competitors. A power-tripping flight attendant was not going to break his composure. "I do not need to check my tablet to know when someone is trying to pull a fast one in my cabin," Cynthia retorted, loud enough that several passengers already seated in business class turned their heads to watch the unfolding drama. "Now, I'm going to ask you one more time to step to the back of the plane where you belong, or we are going to have a very serious problem." The tension in the forward cabin thickened, heavy and uncomfortable. Passengers shuffling in behind Arthur were now forced to a standstill on the jet bridge, creating a bottleneck. Whispers began to ripple through the growing crowd. In seat 2B, directly across from Arthur's rightful place, sat Richard Whitmore, a wealthy hedge fund manager and a regular on this specific route. Whitmore lowered his Wall Street Journal, adjusting his designer glasses to watch the spectacle with mild amusement. Cynthia caught Whitmore's eye and offered him a brief, apologetic smile before turning her vicious glare back to Arthur. "What seems to be the delay?" An impatient voice called out from the jet bridge. "Just handling a security issue with the passenger refusing to find his correct seat," Cynthia called back over Arthur's shoulder. She then leaned in closer to Arthur, dropping her voice to a menacing hiss. "You people always think you can just talk your way into spaces you haven't paid for. It is not happening on my flight." Arthur felt a cold, sharp spike of anger pierce his chest at the phrase, "you people." It was a dog whistle he had heard too many times in his life, a subtle but unmistakable verbal weapon. His grip on his vintage briefcase tightened fractionally. He could end this right now. He could demand she call the captain. He could reveal his identity, flex his newly acquired power, and have Cynthia Miller escorted off the aircraft in front of 300 people. But Arthur Sterling was a strategist. He had purchased Meridian Airlines specifically because it was hemorrhaging money and suffering from abysmal customer satisfaction ratings. He needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. Was this an isolated incident, or was the management culture so toxic that employees felt completely comfortable publicly humiliating paying customers without fear of reprimand? He decided to play the long game. He would be the bait. "Is there a problem here, Cynthia?" asked Jessica, a junior flight attendant barely 22 years old, nervously approaching from the galley. She held the updated digital crew tablet in her hands. "The line on the bridge is backing up all the way into the terminal. This gentleman is refusing to proceed to the main cabin," Cynthia said sharply, not breaking eye contact with Arthur. "Oh, let me just check," Jessica said, tapping the screen of her tablet. She frowned, her eyes widening as she read the updated digital manifest. "Wait, Cynthia, it says right here that seat 2A is—" "Jessica, I am handling this," Cynthia interrupted, her voice cracking like a whip. "The system is clearly glitching. It's been doing it all week. We cannot hold up the boarding process any longer for someone trying to game the system." Cynthia turned her attention fully back to Arthur, crossing her arms again. "Here are your options, sir. You can turn around, walk down that aisle, and find an empty seat in economy while we finish boarding. Or I can signal the gate agent to call Port Authority police, have you removed from this aircraft in handcuffs for interfering with a flight crew, and place you on the federal no-fly list. It is entirely your choice, but you have 5 seconds to make it." A hushed silence fell over the front of the plane. Richard Whitmore audibly scoffed from seat 2B, muttering, "Just go to the back, pal. Some of us have meetings in London." Arthur looked at Cynthia. He memorized the precise shape of her smug, victorious smile. He memorized her employee badge number pinned to her lapel. He looked at young Jessica, who was biting her lip, clearly terrified of her senior colleague and unwilling to speak up further. "Very well," Arthur said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I will not be the reason these people are delayed." "A wise decision," Cynthia mocked, gesturing grandly down the aisle. "Keep walking until you hit row 40. I'll be back there to check your actual ticket once we reach cruising altitude." Arthur turned his back on the first-class cabin. He walked slowly down the aisle, passing through the spacious business-class section, where passengers actively averted their eyes, pretending to be deeply engrossed in their phones or complimentary beverages. He pushed through the heavy blue curtain separating the cabins and entered the cramped, chaotic environment of deep economy. The air here was warmer, thicker. The overhead bins were already jammed to capacity. Arthur navigated his way to the very back of the Boeing 777 near the aft lavatories. He found an empty middle seat in row 45, wedged between a stressed young mother trying to soothe a screaming toddler and a burly, sweaty man already asleep and snoring loudly against the window. Arthur quietly slid his briefcase under the seat in front of him, ensuring the confidential acquisition documents were secure. He folded his long legs into the painfully tight space, his knees immediately pressing against the hard plastic of the tray table. Back at the front of the plane, Cynthia Miller felt a surge of triumphant adrenaline. She loved putting arrogant people in their place. She walked over to seat 2B and offered Richard Whitmore a warm, deferential smile. "I'm so sorry for that unpleasantness, Mr. Whitmore," Cynthia cooed, seamlessly shifting her demeanor from attack dog to subservient host. "May I offer you a glass of our vintage Laurent Perrier before takeoff?" "That would be wonderful, Cynthia. Good job handling that guy." "The nerve of some people," Whitmore chuckled, returning to his newspaper. Cynthia marched to the galley, entirely satisfied with her performance. She had protected her cabin. She had maintained order. What Cynthia Miller utterly failed to realize was that less than 30 feet away, securely locked behind the reinforced cockpit door, Captain Richard Hayes was settling into his left-hand seat. Captain Hayes, a 20-year veteran of the sky and a man of uncompromising integrity, was currently downloading the final, highly classified BIP flight manifest directly from corporate headquarters, a manifest that included a specific red flag security note to ensure the utmost comfort and respect was given to the airline's new supreme boss in C2A. The heavy cabin doors were sealed shut. The aircraft was pushed back from the gate, swallowed by the freezing New York rain. The trap had been set. The flight was airborne, and Arthur Sterling sat quietly in the back row waiting for the seatbelt sign to turn off. Row 45 was a masterclass in corporate neglect. As Flight 4EA2 breached the heavy storm clouds over Long Island and leveled off at 35,000 feet, Arthur Sterling took a mental inventory of his immediate surroundings. The cabin air back here was noticeably stale, lacking the robust circulation of the forward sections. The fabric on his seat was threadbare, a faded, depressing shade of corporate blue that smelled faintly of spilled apple juice and old dust. The tray table lectures were sticky, and the in-flight entertainment screen embedded in the seatback ahead of him flickered with a distorted, unwatchable green static. This, Arthur realized with a heavy sigh, was exactly why Meridian Airlines was trading at a 10-year low. He remained wedged between the snoring passenger by the window and the exhausted young mother in the aisle seat. The mother was desperately trying to bounce her crying infant to sleep while simultaneously attempting to reach a dropped pacifier. Without a word, Arthur carefully reached down, retrieved the plastic pacifier, wiped it clean with a fresh handkerchief from his breast pocket, and handed it back to her with a warm, reassuring smile. "Thank you so much," the woman whispered, looking incredibly relieved. "I'm so sorry about the noise. It's his first time flying. Please do not apologize," Arthur replied, his voice a soothing, rich baritone. "Flying is stressful enough without having to worry about bothering the neighbors. Take a breath. You're doing a wonderful job." As the seatbelt sign chimed off, the heavy curtains separating economy from the premium cabins rustled. The beverage carts were being rolled out. In the forward galley, Cynthia Miller had absolutely no intention of serving the main cabin. Seniority dictated that she could assign herself exclusively to first class, pouring expensive wines and chatting up executives while the junior crew handled the grueling 300-passenger march through economy. Young Jessica emerged from behind the curtain, pushing the heavy metal cart alongside a slightly older flight attendant named Brenda. Jessica looked visibly stressed, her hands trembling slightly as she distributed miniature bags of pretzels and plastic cups of soda. As the cart slowly made its way to row 45, Jessica's eyes landed on Arthur. She froze, a flash of profound guilt washing over her pale face. She remembered the sheer cruelty of Cynthia's public dressing down at the gate. She remembered how quietly and respectfully this man had taken the abuse. "Sir," Jessica leaned in, keeping her voice low so as not to wake the sleeping passengers nearby. "What can I get for you to drink? We have the standard sodas and juices, but if you'd like a miniature bottle of wine or a spirit, I won't charge you for it." "It's on me." Arthur looked up, assessing the young woman. Her nametag was slightly crooked, and the dark circles under her eyes spoke of grueling schedules and inadequate rest periods. Yet despite the toxic environment she was clearly working in, she still possessed a core of genuine empathy. "A simple club soda with a slice of lemon would be perfectly fine, Jessica." "Thank you," Arthur said politely. Jessica poured the drink, her hands still shaking. "I just wanted to say I am incredibly sorry about what happened during boarding. It wasn't right. I should have spoken up when I saw your name on the digital manifest. I'm still on my probationary period, and Cynthia is the union rep for our base. If I cross her, she can make my life a living hell." Arthur accepted the plastic cup, his expression softening. He saw a terrified employee trapped in a broken corporate culture. This was the exact intelligence he had boarded this flight to gather. "You have nothing to apologize for, Jessica," Arthur said gently. "Courage is a difficult thing to summon when your livelihood is on the line. Tell me, how long have you been flying for Meridian?" "6 months, sir," she whispered, glancing nervously back up the aisle as if Cynthia might materialize out of thin air. "It was my dream job, but it's not what I thought it would be. The morale is just gone." "I have a feeling," Arthur said, taking a sip of his club soda, his eyes glinting with a hidden, razor-sharp resolve, that things at Meridian Airlines are going to change very, very soon. Jessica offered a weak, confused smile, completely missing the immense weight of his words. She pushed the cart forward, leaving Arthur to his thoughts. He reached down to his battered leather briefcase, resting his hand on the clasps. Inside were the termination protocols for top-tier management. He hadn't planned on firing middle management or flight staff, but Cynthia Miller had just painted a massive target on her own back, and by extension exposed the rot in the airline's customer service division. Meanwhile, 3 cabins forward, Cynthia was living in an entirely different reality. The first-class cabin was an oasis of ambient violet lighting, plush leather recliners and the soft clinking of real glassware. "More Laurent Perrier, Mr. Whitmore." Cynthia purred, leaning over seat 2B with a chilled bottle wrapped in a crisp white linen napkin. "Don't mind if I do, Cynthia," Richard Whitmore chuckled, holding up his crystal flute. "I have to say it is so refreshing to see a crew member actually enforce the rules. If I have to deal with one more entitlement-driven tourist trying to sneak into the lounge or steal a premium seat, I'm going to start flying private." "I completely agree," Cynthia sighed dramatically, topping off his glass. "You wouldn't believe the audacity of these people. They print out fake itineraries, edit screenshots on their phones. They think we're stupid. But I can spot a scammer from a mile away. That man at the gate. Look at the state of his jacket. Tweed, please. He didn't belong anywhere near this cabin." Whitmore laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Good for you. Keep the riffraff where they belong." Cynthia retreated to the forward galley, practically glowing with self-satisfaction. She checked her digital tablet one more time, just out of habit. The system was still stubbornly highlighting seat 2A in bright green, displaying the name Arthur Sterling with a gold star icon next to it, art notation reserved for VIPs. "Stupid, glitchy software," Cynthia muttered under her breath, tossing the tablet onto the stainless steel counter. She poured herself a cup of coffee and settled onto her jump seat, blissfully unaware of the catastrophic storm gathering right behind the reinforced cockpit door. The flight deck of the Boeing 777 was a sanctuary of quiet professionalism. The only sounds were the steady hypnotic rush of wind over the nose cone and the rhythmic soft hum of the avionics cooling fans. Captain Richard Hayes sat in the left seat, his eyes scanning the endless expanse of star-speckled darkness outside the reinforced windshield. At 58, Captain Hayes was a deeply respected veteran of the skies. He was a former Air Force pilot who commanded his aircraft with absolute authority, but also with a profound sense of fairness and duty. He viewed his passengers not as cargo, but as souls entrusted to his care. Sitting beside him was First Officer David Vance, a sharp, highly capable pilot who was busy monitoring the fuel burn and radio frequencies. "Smooth air ahead, Captain," David reported, adjusting the brightness on his primary flight display. "Oceanic Control just gave us clearance to climb to flight level 370. "Copy that, David. Let's take her up," Hayes replied smoothly, his hands expertly adjusting the autopilot dials. Once the aircraft had settled into its new cruising altitude, Hayes reached over and pulled his company-issued iPad from its mounting bracket. Company protocol required the captain to review the final passenger manifest and ACRS messages once airborne, specifically to check for any high-profile individuals, federal air marshals, or passengers requiring special medical assistance. Hayes tapped the screen opening the secure company portal. A bright red notification immediately popped up, tagged as Urgent, EWUESNs only, commanding pilot. Hayes frowned. He tapped the notification. It was a direct message from the Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Airlines, sent specifically to his aircraft just minutes before they pushed back from the gate at JFK. Subject: BIP Borden, Seat 2A. Captain Hayes. Please be advised that Mr. Pastand, Arthur Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Aviation Holdings, is traveling aboard your aircraft tonight in Seat 2A. As of 48 hours ago, Mr. Sterling's firm acquired a majority controlling interest in Meridian Airlines. He is essentially the new owner of this company. He prefers to travel without fanfare and requested no special boarding announcements. However, standard executive VIP protocols must be strictly adhered to. Ensure his comfort and absolute privacy. Hayes felt a sudden sharp spike of adrenaline. The rumor mill had been churning for weeks that the failing airline was being bought out by a London-based private equity firm, but nobody knew the deal had officially closed. And now, the man holding the axe, the man who could fire the entire board of directors with a single phone call, was sitting 30 feet behind him. "Well, I'll be damned," Hayes muttered, showing the screen to his first officer. David let out a low whistle. The new boss. undercover. Think he's doing an audit on the service? Undoubtedly, Hayes said, straightening his uniform tie. I'm an old-fashioned guy, David. If the man who signs my paychecks is on my airplane, I'm going to step out there, shake his hand, and personally welcome him aboard. Hayes picked up the interphone handset mounted on the center pedestal and punched the 2-digit code for the forward galley. It rang twice before being picked up. "Forward galley, Cynthia speaking," came the crisp, overly rehearsed voice of the senior flight attendant. "Cynthia, it's Captain Hayes," he said, keeping his tone light and professional. "Everything going smoothly back there? How was the service out of New York?" "Perfectly smooth, Captain," Cynthia replied confidently. "We got everyone fed and watered. Half the premium cabin is already asleep." "Excellent," Hayes nodded to himself. "Listen, I need you to do me a favor. We have a very important VIP on board tonight. I need you to go over to seat 2A, make absolutely sure the gentleman has everything he needs, and let him know that I will be stepping out of the flight deck in about 10 minutes to introduce myself." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Only the faint crackle of static broke the quiet. "Cynthia, did you copy that?" Hayes asked, his brow furrowing. "Captain," Cynthia's voice returned, but the confident, rehearsed tone was entirely gone. It had been replaced by a tight defensive edge. "There is no one in seat 2A. Hayes froze. "What do you mean there's no one in 2A? The corporate manifest explicitly states he boarded." "We had a security issue at the gate," Cynthia stated, her voice taking on a haughty, justified cadence. She was doubling down. A man tried to board with a fraudulent digital boarding pass claiming he was in 2A. He didn't match the profile of our premium passengers at all. He became uncooperative, so I downgraded him. I sent him to the back of the aircraft. Seat 2A is empty. The blood drained completely from Captain Hayes's face. He felt a cold, sickening dread pool in the pit of his stomach. "Cynthia?" he said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all of its previous warmth. "What exactly was the name of the passenger you sent to the back?" "I don't know. He claimed it was Arthur Sterling or something," Cynthia huffed, clearly annoyed by the interrogation. "Listen, Captain, I handle the cabin, you handle the flying. I protected our premium inventory from a scammer." Hayes closed his eyes. The sheer, unadulterated stupidity of the situation was staggering. He looked at the iPad screen again. Attached to the VIP file was a small security photograph of Arthur Sterling. He was a distinguished black man in his 60s with a quiet, intelligent gaze. He didn't match the profile of our premium passengers. The dog whistle racism and Cynthia's words echoed in Hayes's mind, making his jaw clench in sudden, white-hot fury. She hadn't just insulted a passenger, she had publicly humiliated the billionaire owner of the airline based on her own vile prejudices. "David," Hayes said quietly, covering the mouthpiece of the handset, "you have the aircraft. Do not take it off autopilot." "I have the aircraft, Captain," David replied, his eyes wide, sensing the sudden, dangerous shift in the atmosphere. Hayes removed his hand from the mouthpiece. When he spoke to Cynthia, his voice was no longer that of a friendly captain. It was the voice of a furious commanding officer about to drop a hammer. "Cynthia, secure your galley carts immediately. Then I want you to report to the flight deck. You will not speak to any passengers. You will not serve any more drinks. You will come through this door right now." "No, Captain, I am right in the middle of. That was not a request, Miss Miller," Hayes snapped, his voice cracking like a whip through the interphone. "Get in here, now." He slammed the handset back into its cradle. The storm wasn't just outside the aircraft anymore. It was inside, and it was about to absolutely annihilate Cynthia Miller's career. Furious, yet maintaining the strict procedural calm required of a commercial airline captain, Richard Hayes waited as the heavy, reinforced cockpit door chimed and unlatched. Cynthia Miller stepped into the dimly lit flight deck. The ambient glow of the instrument panels cast sharp, uncompromising shadows across her face, highlighting the sudden nervous tension tightening her jaw. She had never heard Captain Hayes use that tone of voice in the 6 years they had occasionally flown together. "Close the door behind you and lock it," Hayes ordered, not even turning his head to look at her right away. His eyes remained fixed on the primary flight display for a long moment before he finally swiveled his large leather seat to face her. "Captain, with all due respect, pulling me off the floor during the initial beverage service is highly irregular," Cynthia began, immediately attempting to regain control of the situation by using corporate jargon. "The premium cabin requires constant monitoring and leaving it to the junior staff, Ms. Miller, please stop talking," Hayes interrupted, his voice alarmingly quiet. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the avionics cooling fans. First Officer David kept his eyes strictly forward, his hands resting lightly near the yoke, visibly uncomfortable with the sheer intensity of the captain's anger. Hayes picked up the company iPad from the center pedestal. He tapped the screen to ensure the brightness was at its maximum, bringing up the secure VIP manifest file. He held the tablet out towards Cynthia. "Look at this screen, Cynthia," Hayes commanded. "Read the name, read the corporate directive, and then look very carefully at the photograph." Cynthia stepped forward, her perfectly manicured nails picking nervously at the hem of her uniform jacket. She peered at the glowing screen. The bright red text of the urgent notification jumped out at her first. Subject: VIP boarding, SEAT 2A. Her eyes scanned the paragraph. Mr. Arthur Sterling, CEO of Sterling Aviation Holdings, majority controlling interest in Meridian Airlines, essentially the new owner of this company. Ensure his comfort and absolute privacy. Cynthia's breath hitched in her throat. The color drained from her face so rapidly she looked as though she might faint. Her eyes darted to the attached security photograph. Staring back at her was the face of the quiet, impeccably dressed black man in the charcoal tweed blazer. The man she had verbally abused, threatened with arrest, and banished to the very back of the aircraft. "No," Cynthia whispered, her voice trembling. "No, that's impossible. He didn't say who he was. He had a digital ticket, and the system has been glitching, and he didn't look like—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence under the piercing, unforgiving stare of Captain Hayes. "He didn't look like what, Cynthia?" Hayes asked, his voice dripping with icy contempt. "He didn't look like a billionaire? He didn't look like a CEO? Or did he just not look like the kind of person you believe deserves to sit in a first-class seat?" "Captain, you have to understand, I was just trying to protect the integrity of the cabin," Cynthia pleaded, desperation finally cracking her arrogant facade. "We get scammers all the time. People trying to steal upgrades. I was following security protocols to prevent seat poaching. I am the senior attendant. It is my job to—" "Your job," Hayes snapped, standing up from his seat, his imposing height filling the cramped space of the flight deck, "is to ensure the safety and comfort of our passengers. All of our passengers, not to pay judge, jury, and executioner based on your own deeply flawed prejudices. The man presented you with a valid boarding pass. Instead of doing your job and verifying it properly, you humiliated him in front of an entire cabin. You threatened a man with federal police because you didn't like his tweed jacket." Cynthia took a step back, her back hitting the reinforced door. Tears of sheer panic finally welled up in her eyes. "Captain, please. I've been with this airline for almost 20 years. If he reports this, if he actually owns the company now, I'll lose my pension. I'll lose everything. You should have thought about your pension before you decided to treat a paying customer like a criminal," Hayes said coldly. He reached for his uniform jacket, pulling it off the hanger behind his seat and slipping it over his shoulders. He adjusted his epaulets, ensuring his 4 captain stripes were perfectly straight. "Here is what is going to happen now," Hayes stated, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "You are stripped of all duties in the premium cabins for the remainder of this flight. You will return to the forward galley. You will sit on your jump seat. You will not interact with the passengers, and you will certainly not utter another word to Mr. Sterling. 1. If you need to use the lavatory, you ask Jessica to cover your position. Do I make myself absolutely clear? Yes, Captain, Cynthia choked out, a single tear ruining her flawless makeup as it rolled down her cheek. Unlock the door, Hayes ordered. Cynthia fumbled with the latch, her hands shaking violently. The door swung open, revealing the dark, quiet space of the forward galley. Hayes stepped past her without another glance. David, you have the aircraft, Hayes called back over his shoulder. I have the aircraft, Captain, David replied, verifying the autopilot was firmly engaged. Captain Richard Hayes adjusted his tie, took a deep breath to steady his racing heart, and stepped through the heavy blue curtain, beginning the long, consequential walk toward the rear of the aircraft. Walking through the darkened cabin of a Boeing 777 at cruising altitude is an exercise in careful navigation. The lights had been dimmed to a soft, sleep-inducing amber, and the narrow aisles were occasionally blocked by stretched-out legs or dangling blankets. As Captain Hayes marched through the business class section, passengers who were still awake looked up in surprise. It was highly unusual to see the commanding pilot outside the flight deck, especially marching with such obvious, determined purpose. He pushed through the second curtain, entering the chaotic expanse of deep economy. The air was noticeably warmer here, thick with the smell of recycled breath and microwaved meals. Flight attendants Jessica and Brenda were halfway down the aisle, maneuvering the heavy beverage cart. When Jessica saw the captain approaching, she immediately pulled the cart flush against the seats to let him pass. She noticed the grim, serious set of his jaw and instinctively shrank back, wondering if there was a mechanical emergency. But Hayes offered her a brief, reassuring nod as he squeezed past, his eyes fixed firmly on the very back of the plane. Row 45, Arthur Sterling sat quietly in the middle seat. The burly man next to him by the window was still snoring heavily, his head lolling against the plastic pane. On Arthur's right, the exhausted young mother had finally managed to get her infant to sleep, the baby resting peacefully against her chest. Arthur was reading a dense financial report on his smartphone, the screen brightness turned down low to avoid disturbing his seatmates. "Excuse me." A deep, authoritative voice broke the low hum of the cabin. Arthur looked up. Standing in the aisle, looking entirely out of place in the cramped economy section, was the captain of the aircraft. His uniform was immaculate, the 4 gold stripes on his sleeves gleaming faintly in the dim overhead lights. The young mother jerked awake, her eyes wide with sudden alarm at the sight of the pilot standing directly beside her row. Several passengers in the surrounding seats also sat up, pulling off their headphones, sensing the dramatic shift in the atmosphere. "Mr. Arthur Sterling," Captain Hayes asked, his voice projecting clearly, carrying a tone of absolute, unyielding respect. Arthur slowly locked his phone and slipped it into his breast pocket. He looked at the captain, a faint, knowing smile touching the corners of his mouth. He knew exactly why this man was standing here. The bait had been taken, the corporate system had updated, and the trap had finally snapped shut. "I am Arthur Sterling," he replied, his rich baritone calm and even. Captain Hayes placed his right hand over his heart and offered a deep, formal bow of his head, a gesture of profound apology rarely seen from a commanding pilot. "Mr. Sterling, I am Captain Richard Hayes, the pilot in command of this aircraft. I have just received an urgent communication from corporate headquarters confirming your identity, your recent acquisition of Meridian Airlines, and your rightful seat assignment on this flight." A collective gasp echoed through Row 45 and the surrounding seats. The young mother beside Arthur stared at him, her jaw literally dropping open. The man she had assumed was just a kind, elderly gentleman in a worn jacket was a billionaire CEO who had just bought the entire airline. "Captain Hayes," Arthur nodded politely, making no move to stand just yet. "A pleasure to meet you. The flight has been remarkably smooth thus far. My compliments to you and your first officer." "Oh, sir, there are absolutely no excuses for the abhorrent treatment you received during boarding," Hayes continued, his voice unwavering, ensuring that everyone within earshot understood the gravity of the situation. "On behalf of myself, my flight deck crew, and the entire Meridian Airlines Corporation, I offer you my deepest and most sincere apologies. The employee responsible has been removed from all service duties for the duration of this flight. An official inquiry will be launched the moment we touch down in London." Arthur held the captain's gaze. He saw no corporate sycophancy in the man's eyes. He saw genuine, principled outrage. It was exactly the kind of integrity Arthur was looking for to rebuild the shattered company. "I appreciate your swift action, Captain," Arthur said quietly. "Integrity is a rare commodity these days. You have demonstrated it admirably. If you would be so kind as to retrieve your belongings, Mr. Sterling," Hayes said, gesturing back up the aisle, "it will be my personal honor to escort you back to Seat 2A, where you belong." Arthur nodded. He gently reached down, being incredibly careful not to bump the sleeping infant, and pulled his vintage leather briefcase from under the seat. He stood up, turning to the stunned young mother. "It was lovely sitting with you," Arthur whispered with a warm smile. "If you check your jacket pocket before you leave the aircraft, you'll find a business card. Call the private number on the back tomorrow. My office will arrange for a chauffeured car to take you and your beautiful baby anywhere you need to go in London, completely free of charge. Have a safe onward journey." Before the woman could even stammer out a thank you, Arthur stepped into the aisle. The walk back to the front of the plane was nothing short of cinematic. Captain Hayes led the way, parting the narrow aisle like a snow tower, with Arthur Sterling following closely behind. As they passed the beverage cart, young Jessica stared at Arthur, her eyes wide with shock and awe, finally understanding his cryptic comment about things changing very soon. Arthur offered her a subtle, encouraging wink as he passed. They moved through business class, pushing through the heavy curtain into the exclusive first-class cabin. The atmosphere in the premium cabin changed instantly. The soft violet lighting illuminated the plush seats. In Seat 2B, Richard Whitmore was just finishing his second glass of Laurent Perrier, aggressively typing an email on his laptop. He looked up, annoyed by the sudden rustling of the curtain. His annoyance instantly morphed into utter, paralyzing shock. Walking down the aisle, personally escorted by the captain of the aircraft, was the man in the tweed jacket. The man Whitmore had publicly mocked. The man Cynthia had banished. Standing frozen in the forward galley, clutching a plastic water bottle like a lifeline, was Cynthia Miller. Her face was a mask of sheer terror as she watched Arthur Sterling approach. She pressed herself against the stainless steel counters, trying to make herself as small as possible, unable to look the billionaire in the eye. Captain Hayes stopped at row 2. He gestured to the empty, luxurious window seat. "Your seat, Mr. Sterling," Hayes said, his voice ringing out clearly in the quiet cabin. "If there is anything, absolutely anything you require for the remainder of this flight, you send word directly to the flight deck." "Thank you, Captain," Arthur replied, his voice perfectly level. He didn't gloat. He didn't look at Cynthia. He didn't even look at the pale, sweating hedge fund manager in Seat 2B. Arthur Sterling simply sat down in Seat 2A, placed his battered briefcase on his lap, and calmly buckled his seatbelt. The absolute crushing silence in the first-class cabin was the sound of a completely new world order taking flight. The remaining 6 hours of Flight 4A2, an agonizing, suffocating silence gripped those seated at the front of the aircraft. For Arthur Sterling, however, it was a highly productive evening. He opened his vintage leather briefcase, extracted a thick stack of restructuring proposals, and went to work. Ambient violet cabin lighting illuminated the sharp, decisive strokes of his fountain pen as he reviewed financial ledgers and performance metrics. He had boarded this flight seeking an unvarnished look at his new multi-billion-dollar investment, and he had received exactly that. In Seat 2B, Richard Whitmore spent the entirety of the transatlantic crossing sweating through the collar of his expensive designer shirt. His copy of the Wall Street Journal lay abandoned and crumpled at his feet. Whitmore knew exactly who Arthur Sterling was. Anyone in the upper echelons of global high finance recognized the titan who commanded a $60 billion portfolio. Sterling Aviation Holdings had recently and aggressively acquired several firms Whitmore's hedge fund had shorted, costing his investors millions. The horrifying realization that he had openly mocked the man holding the financial power to crush his entire firm made Whitmore violently nauseous. Somewhere over the dark, freezing coast of Ireland, as the aircraft began its initial descent preparations, Whitmore finally mustered the courage to lean across the narrow aisle. "Mr. Sterling," he began, his voice entirely devoid of its previous arrogant bark, now dripping with desperate, cloying sycophancy. "I must apologize for my earlier comments during boarding. Had I known who you were, I assure you I would have intervened immediately at the gate on your behalf." Arthur did not look up from his paperwork. He simply turned the page, the crisp rustle of the thick paper sounding like a thunderclap in the impossibly quiet cabin. "Character, Mr. Fawn Whitmore, is defined by how you treat those you believe have absolutely no power," Arthur replied, his voice a smooth, impenetrable wall of ice. "Your apologies noted and entirely irrelevant. I suggest you focus on your own portfolio. You are going to need all the help you can get come Monday morning." Whitmore sank back into his plush leather seat, utterly destroyed, recognizing a definitively closed door when he saw one. He spent the rest of the flight staring blankly at the seatback screen, dreading the opening of the financial markets. Meanwhile, in the forward galley, Cynthia Miller sat rigidly on her fold-down jump seat, staring blankly at the stainless steel coffee makers. She was physically isolated, strictly barred from serving the cabin, left to marinate in her own escalating dread. The absolute power she had so ruthlessly wielded just hours ago had completely evaporated. Every time she glanced through the narrow galley opening, she saw the billionaire she had humiliated calmly working, while Captain Hayes occasionally checked in on him with the utmost deference. When the massive Boeing 777 finally touched down at London Heathrow, the dreary English morning rain did nothing to dampen the electric, palpable tension on board. As the aircraft taxied to a specialized VIP gate at Terminal 5, Captain Hayes made his standard arrival announcements, keeping his voice strictly professional, masking the storm that was about to hit the jet bridge. Seatbelt signs chimed off. Before any passenger could even reach for an overhead bin, the forward cabin door was opened from the outside. A contingency of high-ranking corporate executives led by Meridian Airlines Vice President of Operations Gregory Pearson and the head of human resources stepped onto the aircraft. They looked incredibly nervous, frantically adjusting their ties, waiting to formally greet their new supreme shareholder. Arthur neatly packed his documents, snapped the heavy brass locks of his briefcase shut, and stood up. Captain Hayes immediately emerged from the flight deck, positioning himself to block the aisle so no other passengers could disembark before Arthur. "Welcome to London, Mr. Sterling," Captain Hayes said, extending his hand with a warm, genuine smile. "Thank you, Captain. An exemplary flight." Arthur smiled back, shaking the pilot's hand firmly. "Expect a formal call from my executive board on Monday morning. I believe the role of Chief Flight Operations Officer requires a man of your unyielding integrity and leadership." Hayes widened his eyes, a stunned, proud smile breaking across his face. "It would be an absolute honor, sir." Arthur turned to leave the aircraft, but paused right at the forward galley. Cynthia was standing there, completely cornered, clutching her company tablet to her chest like a shield. Gregory Pearson from the terminal had just stepped on board and was looking nervously between Cynthia and his new boss. "Ms. Miller," Arthur said, his tone devoid of shouting but cold enough to freeze jet fuel. "Commercial aviation is built on a foundation of hospitality, safety, and fundamental human respect. You possess absolutely none of these qualities. Your blatant discrimination is not a security protocol. It is a massive corporate liability." Arthur turned his attention to the Vice President of Operations waiting anxiously by the door. "Gregory, this employee is terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct. Revoke her flight privileges, confiscate her security badges, and ensure she is forced to buy her own commercial ticket back to New York on a competing airline. If her labor union attempts to push back, send their representatives directly to my office. I will gladly release the internal flight deck recordings and the official incident report to the global press. Understood completely, Mr. Sterling. Consider it done right now. Gregory nodded instantly, signaling for the HR director to step forward and physically confiscate Cynthia's credentials. Cynthia collapsed back onto her jump seat, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Her long, previously untouchable career was ending exactly where it had started, in the cramped, unforgiving reality of an aircraft galley, violently stripped of all her perceived superiority. As Arthur walked down the long, carpeted jet bridge, he spotted young Jessica standing near the catering carts, watching the historic scene unfold with wide, disbelieving eyes. Arthur stopped and pulled a crisp white business card from his tweed jacket. "You have a good, empathetic heart, Jessica," Arthur said gently, handing her the card. "Call my London office tomorrow afternoon. We are launching a massive new executive customer experience program to overhaul this airline, and I need compassionate, grounded people to help lead it. I think a significant promotion is in order." Jessica beamed, tears of genuine joy and immense relief filling her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." "Oh, where?" "Thank you so much." Arthur stepped out into the bustling, brightly lit terminal, heavy doors of the gate closing firmly behind him. Old, toxic eras of Meridian Airlines were officially dead, and a new one had just taken flight. Justice had been swiftly served at 30,000 feet, proving once and for all that while arrogance might secure an early boarding, genuine character always commands the final destination. What an incredible story of instant karma. Arthur Sterling proved that true power doesn't need a shout, and true class cannot be faked. Cynthia learned the hard way that wearing a uniform doesn't give you the right to demean others, and her toxic arrogance cost her absolutely everything. Meanwhile, Captain Hayes and young Jessica proved that integrity and kindness are always rewarded in the end. If you loved hearing the story of justice served at 30,000 feet, make sure to hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow, so we can bring you more amazing real-life drama and revenge stories. Don't forget to share this video with your friends. Leave a comment below telling us what you would have done if you were the captain, and subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss a new upload. See you in the next one.